All right. Hello out there, D3. Hope everyone's having a great day. I personally bid it this morning as I was walking into the office, so I can guarantee that you're probably having a better start to your day than I did. But anyways, welcome to October's Division 3 monthly webinar. We are going to cover all things 2026 non-controversial legislation. You know me, hopefully. My name is Corey Berg. I'm an associate director for the Division 3 team. And I say we are going to cover all things non-controversial legislation because I did bring a friend with me today, Will Morrison. He's our current post-grad intern. What's up, Will?
Hi, yeah, thanks, Corey. My name is Will Morrison. I'm one of the post-grad interns with the Division 3 Governance and Member Services team, and I'm super happy to be here with everybody.
Awesome. Fun fact, Will just gave you our new title. So if you didn't know this, the Academic and Membership Affairs team, so think me, Will, Jeff, Julie, Brittany, Sarah, Becca, and Joan, have now combined with the governance team. Think Louise, Bill, Eric, Allie, Bryn, Lisa, Malik, and Grace. So we're now one big team, governance and member services. As always, on the D3 monthly webinars, we've got Bryn in the chat. So if you have questions as Will and I go along, please make use of that Q&A function. Also, know that, like always, this webinar is being recorded, and it, along with all of the slides that you're going to see, are going to be posted to the D3 webinar page on nci.org. So if you need to come back and refer to things later, we've got you covered. Will and I have a lot to cover, and so I asked Louise if it was okay to have an hour for today's webinar, and she said yes, which is awesome. But Will and I totally understand if you've got places to be and people to talk to and things to do. So if you do need to leave after 30 minutes, we promise not to be offended. So over the next hour, I'm going to start out kind of like I did last year. So this is the second year we've done this non-controversial webinar. I want to take a little bit of time to talk about the D3 official notice, what it is, and especially focus in on those blue pages. What are you going to find in those blue pages? Why is it important to review what's in there before everyone heads to convention in DC in January? Then we're going to do our thing by running through all 20 pieces of non-controversial legislation that will be up for your ratification in January. And then finally, hopefully, we will save enough time to run through some of your questions that you might be having about these proposals. Okay, so we're going to start with the official notice. This is the NCA convention's play-by-play book for all of the things that will go down during the business session on Friday morning. Beginning November 15th, you're going to be able to find the official notice up on LSDBI, up on NCA.org, and whether or not you're actually coming to convention in DC, this is going to help you know what the membership is going to be doing as it conducts its business. So it is going to have information on all 16 of the legislative proposals and one resolution that you all will be voted on. It's going to have a whole lot more info in what's affectionately called the blue pages. So we're going to take a closer look at that right now. Technically, the blue pages are a series of appendices that in a given year contain details about all of the things that you can see on this slide. But when I think about the blue pages, I think an easier way to think about it is the blue pages are a report out to the membership about everything that the governance structure has been up to on your behalf since last convention in January. So, you know, maybe President's Council adopted some emergency legislation because there was either a legal risk or some other liability facing Division 3. Maybe the Interpretations and Legislation Committee thought that there was an official interpretation that had been buried living in somewhere in LSDBI that would be better suited in the manual because it would be a little bit easier for the membership to find. That's an incorporation of an interpretation. Maybe staff with committee support modified a word or two in a given bylaw just to clarify what that bylaw was really trying to say. That's a modification of wording. Or that last one there, maybe one of the councils adopted non-controversial legislation. I am happy to report that the official notice that's going to drop here in November is not going to contain any emergency legislation. It's not going to have any incorporations in there, and there won't be any modifications of wording because we didn't have any of that this year. So we are just going to focus at this webinar, and the blue pages will focus on that last bullet there on the slide, your non-controversial legislation. This slide, what do you need to know about the blue pages and all of this non-controversial stuff? Well, the first thing that's really important to remember is that everything Will and I are going to talk about, it has been reviewed twice by Management Council. And that is the normal process for something that's non-controversial. First, the idea goes in front of Management Council, and if Management Council thinks that that idea is a good one, it approves the proposal in concept. Then the idea or the proposal comes back around at the next quarterly meeting, and Management Council gets to talk about it again to see if they're still on board with the proposal moving forward. And then if that's the case, the idea or the non-controversial proposal is adopted in final legislative format, and that's when it becomes effective for Division 3. So that's the second really important thing to remember. Everything that we're going to talk about on this webinar is currently effective in Division 3. So it is a rule you have to follow, or it's some sort of flexibility or some sort of option that you can use on your campus right now. Next important thing to know is that you all, as the D3 membership, have the chance to ratify or check Management Council on its decisions on everything we're going to talk about in January. So there will be a consensus motion where all 20 are going to be motioned to be ratified by the membership all at once. There might be a situation where someone in the membership would like to pull out something specifically to talk about separately. That is something that can be done. If that is done, we would continue the motion with everything in the consensus package, and then we would go back to those one or two items that have been pulled out separately and then talk about them each uniquely and have a vote for each. But either way, if things are ultimately approved by the membership, they become officially official in Division 3. If something is pulled out or if some part of the package is defeated, then Division 3 reverts back to the original rule that was in place before the non-controversial proposal actually was effective. So that was a lot of setup here, but I think it's important to have that perspective before we actually go into these proposals. Before I hand it off to Will to get us started, just wanted to check quickly, Bryn, and see if we had any questions in the Q&A.
There are not, so you're good to go.
Okay. So before I hand it to Will, I just want to give one more piece of perspective or kind of behind the scenes how we're thinking about this. 20 proposals is a lot. And we were trying to be strategic about how we're presenting them to you all. This first bucket that Will's going to walk through, I don't want to say they're less important, but they're definitely less common. They're probably the things that you are not going to come across a lot, or you might not ever come across, depending on the situation. But we just want to put it out there because you're going to be casting a vote on this stuff. So Will's going to take time to walk you through them. Then he and I are going to go through the second bucket of proposals, which are going to be more of like the day-to-day stuff that either as a compliance officer or an athletics administrator or as a commissioner, you're going to be in touch with a lot more frequently than you would some of the more like administrative stuff. So Will and I just wanted to make that clear, especially because we're going to be jumping around a bit. So if you see us go from like proposal 7 to proposal 14, there's a method to the madness. We're not skipping numbers on you. So with that, Will, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you. So starting off, we have non-controversial proposal number 1, Committee on Access, Opportunity, and Impact. So because of the new NCAA Constitution, the Board of Governors discussed what changes needed to be made to association-wide committees. As a result, they decided to create one centralized diversity committee. The goal of this new committee is to be more effective and unified when it comes to approaching diversity, and also creating one committee will make it more recognizable to the association. So moving on to the legislation, you can see here the duties and the composition of the committee are outlined. One other thing that's important to note is that because this is an association-wide committee, there is support from the other divisions as well. Moving on, we have proposal number 4, which is presidential terms. Previously, presidents and chancellors served 2-year terms with the ability to be re-upped for 2 years. Now presidents and chancellors are treated the same way as anyone else on a Division III committee. It's going to be a 4-year term. And so moving on to the legislation, you can see here that it's being amended to include presidents and chancellors. And as I mentioned earlier, they will now serve a 4-year term. This change was made in order to remain consistent among all members of the general committees. Next, we have proposal number 5, endocrinologists. The Committee on Safeguards and Medical Aspects of Sport, also known as CSMAS, aims to have appropriate representation for medical professionals. While one of these medical professionals is an endocrinologist, it's not usually typical for an institution to have one on staff. So what this proposal aims to do is specify that the person who checks that box for an endocrinologist can be either from an NCAA institution or the general public. So here in the legislation, you can see now the language is changed to include a member of the general public. One important thing here is that if the endocrinologist is filled by a member of the general public, the individual actually should not be considered the one physician who is a member of the general public, as also required by the legislation. Next, we have proposal number 6, violation structure. So this proposal actually did 2 things at once. First, it put in the manual the existing practice that a violation gets attached to the impermissible conduct committed rather than the individual. And then the second thing it did was create a very limited exception for violations in the sports wagering space. What that exception does is it seeks to balance accountability, efficient resolution, and infractions-related resources. One really important thing about this is not the sports betting proposal that you might think it is. This relates more specifically to the infractions process, and we're actually going to talk more about that sports betting proposal later on in the presentation. So moving on to the legislation, you can see the 2 changes here. The first, that new application of the structure, and then underneath it, that sports wagering exception. Important to note that the recommended processing change to bylaw 19 does not impact or supersede the ongoing membership review of the scope of NCAA sports wagering legislation, and would apply to the current rules or any amended framework that is ultimately adopted. The processing change would, however, immediately benefit institutions currently involved in select sports wagering infractions by allowing an institution's portion of a sports wagering case to be processed at a lower level than an individual, providing that certain factors are met. Oops. Next, we have proposal number 7, which is AdCom composition. You've probably heard of the Division III Presidents and Management Councils, but you may not know that Division III also has an administrative committee. AdCom acts on behalf of the councils between quarterly meetings. It's also traditionally been made up of a mix of presidents and management council members. This proposal put the current practice of depending on the roles of the chair and vice chair of management council an appropriate fifth member onto AdCom into the legislation. So we can see that here. If the chair or vice chair is a president, then the fifth member is an AD. And if the chair or vice president, or if the chair or vice chair is not a president, then the fifth member is the tenured president from Management Council. So next we have proposal number 14, Honors Committee. There really isn't too much to report here, but the committee absorbed a couple of additional awards into its repertoire, which are seen here in the legislation. You can see also that the committee added one member, and this proposal will also expand the duties of the committee, specifically by having them receive nominations for the Woman of the Year award. Moving on to proposal number 17, we have fencing. So currently, it's statistically impossible for institutions that sponsor only women's fencing to win a national championship. And so what this proposal would do is separate the two championships and allow for a pathway for all teams to compete for a national championship. And so here in the legislation, you can see there's a separation on the left here for men's and women's fencing. And then on the right, you can see an increase in the number of championships as well. So the next two non-controversial proposals that will be discussed are related because they both have to do with the infractions process. Division 1 and Division 2 have had this previously, and it saved institutions months on different infractions cases. So first, we have non-controversial number 18, negotiated resolution. So what this does is what this did is it established a process enabling enforcement staff to resolve Division 3 infractions matters through settlements with institutions or individuals when there was not one previously. So under this proposal, parties will work together to agree on facts, violations, and penalties. These agreements are then submitted for review and approval by the Committee on Infractions. So here you can see that addition in the legislation. One other thing worth noting here is that the standard agreements are only rejected if the penalties are found to be manifestly unreasonable or if the agreement does not serve the best interests of the association. Moving on to proposal number 19. So currently all parties in an infractions case must agree on a single resolution method. So if some reach agreement for summary disposition, but others want a hearing, the entire case would actually default to a hearing. And so this would change and speed up agreements for some parties while still allowing hearings for those contesting violations. So it would permit Division 3 schools to use negotiated resolution or the traditional processes. And so here in the legislation, you can see that the change opens up the possibility for multiple resolution methods, such as a negotiated resolution, a hearing, or a summary disposition. So I know that was a lot. So if anyone needs to run and grab a quick coffee refill, we're going to take a quick pause here for any questions that you all might have so far. And Bryn, I don't know if there are any in the Q&A.
There are no questions at the moment.
I'm glad I had someone who went to law school to explain those infractions one. So yes. All right. Well, I think we can keep going.
Yep. So moving on. So kind of just a brief reminder. Those were kind of some of the less common proposals. And so here's some of the stuff that you might see a bit more, starting out with proposal number 2, tryouts with pro teams. So previously, student athletes could go to tryouts longer than 48 hours, but they'd be on the hook for their own expenses, such as food, lodging, and travel back home after those 48 hours. That didn't really seem fair since traditional students can go on job interviews of any length and accept expenses. So as you can see here in the legislation, under this proposal, professional teams may now provide actual and necessary expenses for student athletes beyond that 48-hour limit. One thing that's important to note here is that this does not affect anything your institution can or can't do. All this does is talk really about what student athletes are permitted to accept from pro teams. And with that, I'm going to now pass it back to Corey.
Thanks, Will. I am back, and we are on to non-controversial proposal 2026-3. Has to do with the definition of intercollegiate competition for both purposes of bylaw 14 eligibility and bylaw 17 playing and practice season. And if you read this slide, you're probably like, why do I care about this? And here's why you should care about this. Intercollegiate competition can only take place during a team's declared playing and practice season. If it happens outside of the season, then we get into some violation territory and nobody wants to be there. Staff was getting some questions from different institutions of, okay, we understand that concept, but when it's outside of the season and student athletes are off voluntarily doing their own thing, what are they allowed to wear? What equipment can they use? What can they call themselves if they're on like some sort of outside team voluntarily? There was a lot of confusion about what they could wear, what they could use, what they could call themselves, and not risk triggering intercollegiate competition. And so what this what this non-controversial proposal did is both in bylaw 14026 and 17029 is it made that distinction a lot more clear to say if your student athletes compete while representing the institution, that's intercollegiate competition. I think that is a definition we were all pretty familiar with. The circle is showing you where the bulk of the work, where the consolidation, where the clarification came in. So intercollegiate competition also happens if a student athlete competes and receives expenses from your institution, and those expenses can include transportation, meals, housing, current in-use uniforms, current in-use equipment. Any of those things would also trigger intercollegiate competition and therefore only permissible during the declared season. Now, hopefully, with this clarified definition, you can advise your student athletes a little bit more easily about what they can and can't get up to outside of the season. Next up for all of our ice hockey fans out there is non-controversial proposal number 8, having to do with major junior ice hockey. Until recently, major junior ice hockey was treated differently than any other sport in Division III when it came to a prospective student athlete's participation history before they enroll in college. Previously, no matter what, if you had a prospective student athlete who had major junior participation history, they had an automatic charge a season, sit a year at your D3 before they were eligible to compete for your school. What this non-controversial proposal did is it got rid of that automatic charge and sit condition for your major junior ice hockey PSAs. And now when they get to your campus, if they go through the EC, if they're international, their major junior participation is going to be evaluated the same way any other pre-enrollment participation for any other sport is evaluated. Probably the most important thing about this proposal is the effective date. So I said at the beginning of this presentation is everything Will and I are talking about is currently effective in Division III. And that's true for this proposal. But the reason why I'm pointing out the effective date for you now is because it only applies to those individuals who are enrolling in Division III for the first time after August 1st of this year. So if you have someone who's currently on your campus, they were previously enrolled in Division III, and they have major junior ice hockey participation, this doesn't apply to them. There's no retroactive application. So just make sure that your ice hockey student athletes know what's up, your ice hockey coaches know what's up, and your prospective student athletes know what's up. And here it is, used to be. You can see there in the red circle, all of bylaw 142443 is struck through because it got rid of that condition. All right, we're going to move on to non-controversial proposal number 9. Previously, there had been a couple of bylaws in bylaw 16 that seemed to be saying different things. There was one bylaw that said student athletes could go to recognition banquets put on by local civic organizations, and they could get an award at that banquet from that organization. And then we had another bylaw that said student athletes could receive expenses to go to those sort of banquets as long as no award was given. And that was really confusing. Can you get an award? Can you get expenses? Can you not get an award? So proposal number 9 consolidated multiple bylaws and clarified that student athletes can go to these recognition banquets. It's okay for the institutions to provide expenses to get them to the banquets. And if there are awards given out, that's okay too. And then these are the bylaws that were in play. 16144, 16161 is no longer with us, and then 1610 got a little bit of an update as well. Moving on to non-controversial proposal number 10. This proposal did 2 things, and it's all about food. So it's probably going to make a lot of people happy. Did you know that previously, if meals were missed for practice activities, or if it was during an institutional vacation period, you as an institution were only permitted to replace meals for student athletes who were on the meal plan? So commuters, no, you shouldn't have been replacing those meals. Student athletes who live off campus and weren't on meal plans shouldn't have been replacing those meals. It was only permissible for you to replace meals for those student athletes who were on meal plans. This proposal number 10, it fixed things to say, hey, let's put the decision-making power with the institutions, and if they want to feed everyone and they have the resources to feed everyone, let them feed everyone, which I personally think is a good idea. The other thing this proposal did was to consolidate all of the who, what, when, where, and whys around occasional meals. So now occasional meals can come from just about anyone. They can be at any location as long as it's consistent with your institutional policy for student athletes to receive meals in that manner. And here we are with the updated bylaws. Over there on the left, 1651, this is where you're going to see the updates for the missed meals for practice and missed meals during vacation time. And over there on the left, 161115, that's your occasional meal update. Moving on to proposal number 11, which if the food just made you really happy, I think this one will also make you very happy, has to do with apparel and equipment. So if you have ever asked staff a question, either in person or RSRO, about apparel and equipment, and we've given you an answer like you can give them one polo shirt and they can keep it, or you have to have an issue and retrieval basis unless your institutional policy says something's not reusable. Those answers were probably pretty frustrating because it was never a clear-cut yes or no when it came to apparel and equipment. This proposal number 11 defaults everything back to your institutional policy. So basketball shoes, warm-ups, travel bags, issue what your institution deems appropriate and permit your student athletes to either keep it or return it or give it back, whatever works best for your institution and your resources. And as long as it stays consistent with whatever your school's policy is, that's okay by us. And you see that there. Bylaw 161117 is for your non-athletics apparel, and then 161118 is your athletics apparel and equipment. Non-controversial proposal number 12. This is the last in the series of non-controversial proposals that came from the interpretation and legislation committee's top to bottom review of bylaw 16. So if you've been noticing a theme over the last couple of slides, it was what are the benefits and expenses that we can or can't provide to student athletes. And you also notice that a lot of the changes from these non-controversial proposals have been putting the power back on the institution to make the decisions. This proposal, number 12, is no different. And instead of benefits and expenses, this proposal talks about support services, specifically academic and other support services. So previously, if your institution wanted to provide certain academic or career support services, you had to be able to demonstrate that that same service was available to some other part of the student body on campus, and it was available on a basis unrelated to athletics. That is way easier said than done in a lot of situations. So this proposal permits your institution to provide this sort of general academic-based programming and services for your student athletes, even if it's not otherwise available, as long as it's consistent with your institutional policy to do so. So some examples that you're going to see on the next slide when we look at the bylaw: academic advising, go for it. Priority registration, go for it. Diversity programming, please do. Things like motivational speakers can also happen, but if they have an athletics focus versus a general academic focus, the stuff that has the athletics tilt has to then factor in things like bylaw 17. Is it in season, out of season? Really, the goal with this proposal is, again, to empower your institution or your conference to make the decisions and provide the programming and services that your student athletes need as best you can provide them without the burden of some arbitrary bylaw. And so this slide, you can see we've got a brand new bylaw 16.3.1 that talks about that general academic programming, and you can see some of the ones there that I had listed. And then down at the bottom, 16.3.2, that's that athletics based stuff where you still have to think about bylaw 17. And with that, I think I'm handed back to Will for a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. Next, we have non-controversial proposal number 13, third-party relationships. So currently, in relation to third-party relationships, there's a lot of red tape. Institutions and conferences are restricted from publicizing sponsorships with specific third parties. One of those restrictions includes pro sports leagues, and also kind of how funds are gained from third-party relationship and how those may be used. As we can see in the legislation, this proposal would remove these restrictions. This will give institutions and conferences more freedom to gain revenue and leverage their relationships, which ultimately would enhance student athlete experiences. This would also permit reciprocal marketing agreements, so both the third party and the institution or conference may promote these sponsorships. And it's also important to note that these changes would not supersede Division III championship policies and procedures. So the rationale here is if you have a great relationship with a third party, who are we really to stop that? Next, we have non-controversial proposal number 16, mental health hardship waiver. So the first thing to note about this proposal is that it's retroactive and would thus apply to all academic years, meaning that if a student athlete qualified for this last year, they can actually apply this waiver retroactively. This proposal comes after the mental health hardship waiver pilot program and after a holistic review of the program's data and outcomes. The main assertion is that a student athlete's mental health cannot always be documented the same way as an injury. So here you can see that this proposal allows for both contemporaneous and non-contemporaneous medical documentation from a physician or any licensed practitioner qualified to provide mental health services. So now I'm going to pass it back to Corey.
All right. I am here to talk about, I think, our last one before maybe we stop for some questions. Non-controversial proposal 2026-20, having to do with the playing rules structure and process. You may or may not be tracking on this, but Division One in the last weeks and months has gone through quite a bit of transition with its governance structure. So they went from looking fairly similar to how we do things in D3, right? Having a board and having all these committees. They are now structured completely differently, where each sport or group of sports has its own kind of little system to get things done. That is great for them, but it leaves us in Division 3 and our friends in Division 2 who had previously been sitting on these association-wide committees that discuss things like the playing rules for all of our sports. What were we going to do now that Division One was pulling out of this existing structure? So what this proposal did is it removes Division One from the playing rules structure that Division Two and Division Three currently had, and it builds the structure back, just reflecting that it would be made up of members of Division Two and Division Three. So if you have more specific playing rules questions, Will and I are happy to point you to our friends on the playing rules staff, but know that this is just structural to deal with the fact that Division One has gone in a little bit different direction, but understanding that this is still a really important topic for Division Two and Division Three. So we needed to maintain some sort of structure on our end to make sure that the membership is represented in these playing rules conversations.
So if you've been playing along at home, you might have noticed that we have missed one non-controversial proposal, and that is number 15, sports betting. And so we're going to provide a quick update on that. So you may have heard that things are going to change in Division 3 in relation to sports betting, specifically removing the prohibition on betting for professional sports. Division 1 is currently, as we speak, discussing whether or not they want to push this proposal forward. They weren't ready yet, and so now they're kind of having that conversation again. As a result, Divisions 3 and 2 have kind of decided to take a sit and wait approach to this before taking any further action on this proposal. So as soon as we know more, you will know more. And that's kind of our update on that for the time being.
Sure is. All right, we've reached the end of our slides. We did it, all 20 proposals. Bryn, I see one question in the queue, but which I can take, happy to take, but just want to invite anyone else, if you have questions about any of those non-controversial proposals or the process, how things are going to go down in DC, feel free to shoot those in and Will and I will do our best. But the question that I'm seeing right now, I think was related to the proposal number 12 about the general academic services. Does that include class registration? And the answer to that is it can now. So previously when schools would say, hey, can we offer priority registration to our student athletes? We always said, as long as it's otherwise available to another group on campus. So if student government has it, awesome, you can do it. If the band has it, great, you can do it. Now it is, what is your institutional policy? If your institutional policy permits it, that works for us. What I would say is what that non-controversial proposal doesn't do is it doesn't give your student athletes permission to miss class for practice, but it does let you give them that priority registration option. So hopefully they can work their schedule and not have to worry about any sort of conflict there.
I see that second question, and Corey, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but as of right now, we've not gone through and pushed this non-controversial proposal forward yet, so it is still not allowed for student athletes to bet on pro sports. And if we make that decision to go forward with it, that effective date will be immediately when we go forward with it. But as of now, it's still currently not allowed. Kind of sitting and waiting to see what's going to happen with that.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna build on that, Will, because I think it also helps answer the question that just came in. So the one that Will tackled was, just to clarify, sports wagering. It's currently allowed on pro sports, but does not have an effective date. The answer to that is no. It's not currently effective. It hasn't gone through that second step of the non-controversial process. So Management Council took a look at it earlier in the academic year, the calendar year, said, yep, great idea. We support it in concept. When it came back around for that second bite of the apple in the summer, Division I had not moved forward in its process. And because the sports wagering legislation is common across all three divisions, when things are common like that, we typically move together as one unit, all three divisions together. So although Division III was ready to take another look at it, Division II was ready to take another look at it, we weren't able to move forward at the July council meeting because Division I wasn't ready. To what Will said, Division I is literally meeting right now to have a conversation about what they want to do with sports wagering. If the outcome of that conversation is favorable, then the Division III proposal, number 15, is going to come back in front of Management Council here at the end of October. And that's when they will take a second look at the proposal. If they're still on board, that is when it would become effective for Division III. So right now, the prohibition on sports is still there. And as soon as we have any sort of update for you, we will absolutely let you know. But if you're really watching your calendar, come back and start checking your emails, start checking your social media after the councils meet here at the end of the month. All right, I'm going to see another one in here that I think is coming to me because it has to do with equipment. So regarding non-controversial 11, softball bats that our institution provides are obviously athletics equipment. Are student athletes permitted to keep the bats and or use them outside of your playing and practice season? Great question. So this actually combines a couple of the non-controversial proposals that we brought up. But let's talk about the keep the bat first. That would rest in proposal number 11, like you said, athletics equipment. We would default to your institutional policy, whether you let the student athletes use the keep the equipment or whether you issue it on an issue and retrieval basis each year. The other non-controversial proposal that this kind of leans into is that definition of intercollegiate competition part. Remember that the new clarified definition for intercollegiate competition, it says if a student athlete receives expenses, including equipment still in use by the institution, that could trigger intercollegiate competition. So I think to answer your question, Emily, I would say you would default to institutional policy to say, am I going to let Louise take the bat home with her? But if she uses it, then that could trigger intercollegiate competition outside of the season and present some issues there.
Jason, to answer that question about reviewing the medical hardship discussion again, kind of the main points there was it's retroactive. So that mental health hardship waiver. The mental health hardship waiver is going to be retroactive. It's going to apply to all academic years, meaning that if a student athlete qualified for it last year, they can apply this waiver retroactively. This comes after the pilot program and a review of the data and outcomes of that. Kind of the main rationale there is mental health cannot always be documented the same way as an injury. And so in relation to that, the language in the legislation is going to allow for both contemporaneous or non-contemporaneous medical documentation, either from a physician or any licensed practitioner qualified to provide mental health services.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add to Will's really good description about this mental health piece is it is the one area of the legislation where things are allowed to be retroactively applied. So you remember when I was talking about major, junior, and the ice hockey bit, I was like, it is not retroactive. Hardship waivers, just by nature, are a different space. So you're allowed to apply that change that in this case is more student athlete friendly retroactively. So not only could you apply it to a student athlete who had a mental health condition last year when the pilot was still in effect, you could have someone that comes to you and says, hey, in the 21-22 academic year, I had a mental health condition that kept me from getting full use of my season. And that is a mental health hardship waiver request that you can file with your conference office. So all you commissioners out there listening know that's an option, and that your institutions might be coming for you with those sorts of requests. Another question about sports wagering. How is sports wagering considered non-controversial? Great question. I don't know if Louise wants to pop in on that, but I think the easiest answer that I can come up with is not across all three divisions, because Division I doesn't have non-controversial proposals the way that we do in 2 and 3, but the governing bodies in Division II and Division III just felt like that was the appropriate route to take, given the nature of the topic, the timeliness of which and for which things could get done. I would also say if Division I decides to move forward right now, and then our management council in Division III reviews the sports wagering proposal at the end of this month at its quarterly meeting, it will be in the official notice. And like every one of these non-controversial proposals we've talked about, the full membership has the ability to ratify it in January at convention. So it will be part of that consent package. If someone wanted to pull it out, that would certainly be an option, and then it would be discussed and voted on separately. Will, I'm going to ask you a hardship waiver one. So for the medical mental health hardship waiver, do they still have to follow the contest in the first half of the season type requirements like we have for physical injuries?
Yeah, so the mental health hardship is just a type of medical hardship, so they're going to have to follow, from my understanding, all of those other requirements as well. It's just kind of a subset of a medical hardship waiver. So the main difference there being the non-contemporaneous medical documentation, but everything else is going to remain pretty consistent.
Yep, that's right. The math still needs to math. Also seeing another apparel question. So clarifying that institutional policy will be the default that permits number of items issues to student athletes, type of items, whether some or all items could be kept or turned back in. The answer to that is yes. Institutional policy will dictate that all. Yeah, great question. Would university apparel worn in a summer league trigger outside competition? Example, practice t-shirt, and how should we monitor? So it would be uniforms that are still in use by the institution. Anything else, whether it's practice gear, whether it's retired uniforms, that is separate and apart and perfectly okay. You really just worry about your current still in use uniforms. And how you monitor, I think just have a really well thought out either issue and retrieval or just general equipment policy where you are making sure you know what your student athletes have out there when they're out of season. Okay. I love all these questions. I like that Will's getting questions on his first webinar. All right, so this was awesome. I know we have a couple of minutes left, and so if you have a last minute question, we'll hang on here. I'll stall a little bit, but also wanted to just say thank you for tuning in. I know that legislation can sometimes be a little dry, and we had a lot of it. So thank you for engaging and listening and for your questions. Also want to take a second to plug the fact that Will and I will be back in December. We are going to come back and run through not the blue pages, but we will come through and run through those 16 legislative proposals and one resolution, 8 from the governance side, 8 from the membership side. So all of the proposals that you will be voting on, we will come do our thing, very similar to what we did today, to walk through the proposals, take questions. If there were any updates that come out of the council meeting, like sports wagering related, we can probably take a question or two on those as well. But Will, I don't know if you have any parting thoughts you want to offer.
No, just thank you. I appreciate it. It was great getting to speak to everybody. And yeah, I know that the legislation can't always be the most interesting thing, but hopefully it was super helpful and helped educate on a lot of the non-controversial proposals we had.
All right. Awesome. I saw another question come in, but my Teams app is telling me that conversations aren't loading right now. So if you just sent that last minute question, and I'm sorry, but hit us up on RSRO and we'll get it all sorted out for you. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day. See you in December.